Auschwitz was not a camp. It was a state-run industrial complex for the elimination of human beings. 1 million people, a population equivalent to a major European capital, was processed through this machine. How did the state apparatus refine the mechanics of death into a perfect conveyor belt? The rhythm of the process was mechanical, constant. Freight trains arrived day and night. The steady, rhythmic clatter of wheels on iron rails announced the arrival of new raw material. Inside the wagons, people stood in total darkness. No food, no water. Oxygen levels dropped as the trains crossed the continent. The transport phase was the first stage of physical exhaustion. The ramp was a sorting station. An SS officer stood in the center of the platform. He made a silent signal with his hand. To the left meant labor, to the right meant immediate liquidation. A single movement of a thumb decided the fate of thousands in seconds. There were no explanations, only orders and the impact of batons. The execution phase followed a strict protocol. The gas chambers operated with terrifying industrial efficiency. 20 minutes. That was the window required to terminate thousands of lives. Once the screaming stopped, the processing of remains began. Gold teeth were extracted, hair was shorn, personal belongings were inventoried and shipped to the Reich. The system eliminated individuals as industrial waste. There was no chaos or logistical failure in this architecture. Every gear turned according to a central plan approved at the highest bureaucratic levels. The machine functioned without interruption and without error. To process 1 million victims, Heinrich Himmler required a perfect geographical intersection. In the spring of 1940, the SS command shifted its focus to Upper Silesia. The choice was not emotional. It was a cold calculation of space and rails. Rudolf Haas arrived at the outskirts of the Polish town of Auschwitz to oversee the conversion. His task was logistical. He took over old Polish military barracks. These brick structures were merely the foundation. They were the skeleton of what would become the most efficient death machine in human history. The topography of Upper Silesia offered the Reich a unique strategic advantage. It was isolated from major urban centers. It possessed vast, empty territories for industrial expansion. Most importantly, the regional railway maps revealed a dense, radiating web of steel. This network provided direct access to every major European capital. Auschwitz was not a remote outpost. It was a continental hub. Himmler personally selected the site for its connectivity. The location allowed for the seamless delivery of human cargo from across the occupied territories. The infrastructure was already in place. The SS leadership finalized the site selection and formally initiated the transformation of the landscape. The logistics of Upper Silesia shifted into operational mode on January 20, 1942. At the Wannsee Conference, high-ranking Nazi officials synchronized genocide across the entire continent. Auschwitz became the epicenter. Birkenau functioned as the industrial core. Engineers integrated 4 massive crematoria with gas chambers. Each unit could eliminate 2,500 people in a single cycle. SS doctors stood on the central ramp. Joseph Mengele was among them. A single gesture decided everything. One direction meant temporary slave labor. The other meant immediate liquidation. The bureaucracy demanded efficiency. A daily quota of 6,000 people. This volume equaled the systematic erasure of a small provincial town every 24 hours. The 4 crematoria reached a combined processing capacity of over 8,000 bodies per day. The daily quota of 6,000 deaths immediately attracted the attention of the IG Farben Corporation. Private capital saw the camp as a strategic industrial asset. The board of directors approved an investment of 700 million Reichmarks. At the time, this sum represented the budget of a modern transnational megaproject. Why did a chemical giant invest 700 million marks into a death camp? The answer was simple: an inexhaustible supply of free labor. The company broke ground on the Buna work plant. This massive chemical complex aimed to produce synthetic rubber and fuel for the front. The construction site turned into a landscape of skeletal figures. Prisoners moved heavy steel beams by hand. They mixed concrete in freezing temperatures. Toxic chemical fumes rose from the production lines, stinging the eyes and lungs of the workers. Here, the German economy met biological limits. IG Farben spent 700 million marks on infrastructure, yet the corporation provided a worker with less than 1,000 calories per day. Other industrial giants followed the investment lead. Krupp and Siemens integrated their production chains into the camp system. They treated prisoners as a consumable raw material. 12-hour shifts became the standard. By mid-1944, the machinery reached its peak. Between May and July, 430,000 Hungarian Jews arrived at the ramp. This was the largest single deportation operation of the Holocaust. The crematoria failed to keep pace with the influx. SS officers ordered the digging of massive open-air pits. Fire replaced the furnaces. The sky over Birkenau remained illuminated by a constant, unnatural glow. The smell of burning flesh reached settlements several miles away. In October 1944, the Sonderkommando attempted to break the cycle. Women in nearby munitions factories smuggled in small amounts of explosives. The prisoners detonated a charge in Crematorium 4. The blast tore through the brickwork and killed several guards. It was a brief rupture in the industrial process. A worker survived an average of 3 months. Before sending laborers to the Krupp and Siemens factories, the state performed a rigorous inventory of its new assets. In 1942, the SS formalized this process. Every Jewish prisoner underwent a biological transformation into industrial raw material. The procedure began with the removal of all personal identifiers. Guards stripped the arrivals of their clothing and possessions. Barbers shaved every inch of their bodies. This was not for hygiene, but for harvesting. They packed human hair into sacks for shipment to Germany. Then came the needle, a sharp, rhythmic sting in the skin of the left forearm. The tattoo replaced the name. A human being became a serial number in a ledger. This was the final stage of dehumanization. The person died, the unit was born. Storage conditions matched the inventory logic. 6 people occupied a single wooden plank in overcrowded barracks. In the first weeks of 1942, the mortality rate reached 25%. 1 in 4 units failed immediately under the physical and psychological shock. Survival depended on 2 factors: physical endurance and the ability to remain invisible. Guards executed prisoners for minor infractions or simple boredom. Periodic selections purged the weak from the ranks to maintain the efficiency of the workforce. German industry utilized human hair to manufacture felt and thread. To optimize the processing of a growing inventory of inmates, the SS required the implementation of new chemical technologies in September 1941. How to liquidate 850 people without consuming scarce ammunition. The solution emerged from catalogs of agricultural pesticides. Karl Fritsch proposed a shift in methodology. He turned to Zyklon B. Originally, IG Farben developed this substance as a fumigant for granaries and clothing. It was a civilian tool for pest control. The transition to mass murder was a matter of industrial adaptation. The first experiment took place in the basement of Block 11. Officers descended the stairs. 850 Soviet and Polish prisoners waited in the dark. Fritsch opened the canisters. Pellets hit the floor. A distinct hissing sound filled the room as the crystals released hydrogen cyanide. The observers watched through reinforced glass. High-ranking officials noted the speed of the reaction. The process was silent and cheap. The result satisfied the hierarchy. Research and development moved to the next phase. Architect Fritz Ertl began drafting blueprints for a massive expansion 3 kilometers from the main site. He designed Auschwitz II, Birkenau. The plan specified a projected capacity of 100,000 inmates. 100,000. The scale required a dedicated extermination infrastructure. Heinrich Himmler issued a direct order to expand the facilities for the final solution. The logistical requirements of Birkenau demanded a continuous supply chain spanning 23 European nations. Between 1942 and 1944, this network operated with industrial precision. The Deutsche Reichsbahn functioned as the primary contractor. It did not categorize these transports as military secrets or special operations. Internal ledgers reveal a standard bureaucratic procedure. The railway issued the SS formal invoices for one-way passenger tickets. Children under 4 traveled for free. Those under 12 received a 50% discount. The genocide was processed as a high-volume commercial transaction. The scale required over 100 dedicated train compositions. Rolling stock moved from as far as Oslo and Corfu. While the Reichsbahn collected fares, the biological resource inside the cattle cars rapidly degraded. Lack of oxygen and water transformed the journey into an initial phase of selection. The strongest fought for proximity to the narrow air vents. The elderly and the sick were the first to expire on the floor. Mothers failed to sustain their children in the suffocating heat. By the time the bolts on the wagon doors slid back at the Birkenau ramp, the initial inventory had already been reduced. 33% of the cargo died before reaching the destination. The logistical chain of the Holocaust integrated the transport phase as the initial stage of physical liquidation. Inside these 100 trains, the systematic destruction of human cargo began long before the wheels stopped at the Birkenau platform. The process relied on standard freight wagons. These wooden cattle cars lacked windows, insulation, or ventilation. Guards forced between 80 and 100 people into each unit. Space was a luxury. Movement was impossible. The journey from the furthest reaches of occupied Europe lasted up to 10 days. Within these sealed boxes, the air grew thick. One sensory detail defined the transit: the suffocating heat rising from the press of unwashed bodies. There were no sanitary facilities. There was no water. There was no food. Decades later, investigators recovered the meticulous railway registers of the Deutsche Reichsbahn. These ledgers treated the deportations as standard commercial transactions. The bureaucracy recorded every kilometer and every pfennig. Thermal extremes accelerated the attrition rate. In winter, the wooden walls offered no protection from the frost. In summer, the wagons became ovens. By the time the doors opened, the cargo had been stripped of its human status through sheer physical exhaustion. Dehydration and suffocation ensured that the sorting process started in transit. The SS received a resource already broken by the logistics of the journey. The cars contained only those who survived the 10 days without a single drop of water. After 10 days in sealed freight cars, the surviving resource reached the sorting ramp. The doors slid open. Light hit the interior. Chaos began immediately. Armed guards and trained dogs created a wall of noise. Shouts of Schnell filled the air. This disorder was a calculated psychological tactic. It suppressed any capacity for organized resistance. A small number of guards could thus manage thousands of disoriented people. The process of inventory began. The SS separated families instantly. Men were moved into one column, women and children into another. Personal property stayed on the platform. The guards issued a false promise. All belongings would be returned later. This lie maintained order. The sorting ramp was an industrial filter. SS medical officers stood at the center of the flow. They conducted superficial examinations of the arrivals. No detailed charts, no medical history. One doctor made a brief gesture with his hand. A movement to the left meant immediate liquidation. These individuals would enter the gas chambers within hours. A movement to the right granted a temporary reprieve as forced labor. The criteria were strictly pragmatic. The regime sought young, healthy bodies capable of high-intensity physical output. Economic utility dictated survival. The SS immediately discarded the useless categories: small children, the elderly, pregnant women, and the disabled. Doctors rejected anyone with visible illness or physical weakness. The automated precision of 1944 was not built in a day. It evolved from a crude manual pilot project. In 1940, the site lacked gas chambers and industrial crematoria. High mortality rates stemmed from a simpler formula: starvation and physical exhaustion. This was the standard for the early camps of the Third Reich. Labor was not a means to an end. Labor was the weapon. The transition from a provincial prison to a continental slaughterhouse began with a specific date, June 14, 1940. A train arrived at the small station near the former Polish barracks. It carried 728 individuals. These were not the industrial resources of later years. They were Polish political prisoners. The reception lacked the clinical silence of the final years. It was loud. It was chaotic. SS guards used clubs. They used dogs. This was artisanal cruelty, performed by hand. The system was still testing its own limits. By 1941, the bureaucracy demanded a shift from punishment to liquidation. The camp's role changed. The first transport of 728 Poles marched toward the gates. Whether it was the initial 728 Poles in 1940 or hundreds of thousands of Jews in 1944, every unit remained a fixed entry in reports for Berlin. The camp operated as a high-frequency branch of the state bureaucracy. A sharp whistle pierced the pre-dawn silence. It cut through the barracks at 4:30 a.m. in the summer. In winter, the signal shifted to 5:30. Prisoners emptied excrement buckets and straightened straw mattresses within minutes. The morning inventory began on the central square. This was the appel. How did a skeleton crew of guards manage tens of thousands of subjects? The system transformed mass murder into an accounting problem. An SS officer stood on the frozen parade ground. He held a clipboard with standardized forms. He moved down the lines, counting heads with mechanical indifference. To his left, a junior official noted the figures in columns. These documents featured specific rows for the write-off of raw materials. Human life functioned as industrial supply. The administration treated death as a logistical correction. By midday, clerks typed the final tallies. Carbon copies of these mortality reports traveled directly to the desks of the SS main economic and administrative office in Berlin. The capital demanded precision. The inventory of the living and the dead started punctually at 5:30. Berlin dictated the mandate. Execution fell to a garrison of 7,000 SS officers. The institutional architecture of Auschwitz relied on a terrifying disproportion. At any given moment, the permanent contingent fluctuated between 400 and 900 personnel. A handful of men controlled tens of thousands. How did such a small force maintain absolute dominance? The system functioned through delegated terror. The camp operated as a departmental branch of the state bureaucracy. In the administrative building, the dry clatter of typewriters filled the halls. An officer pressed a metal seal onto a document. Ink dried on orders for the political department. These papers moved from the camp Gestapo to the labor and medical offices. Every sector had a name: the administrative department, the medical department, the labor department. Efficiency replaced manpower. The SS did not need a soldier for every prisoner. They integrated the victim into the machinery of their own destruction. Bureaucracy ensured that resistance remained impossible before it even formed. Records show that even at its peak, the ratio of guards to prisoners remained unprecedented in the history of penal systems. 7,000 members of the SS cycled through the camp during its operation. Yet the daily oversight rested on fewer than 900 permanent guards. Ordinary citizens maintained the machinery of the final solution. Teachers, accountants, and farmers filled the ranks of the SS. These men were not career criminals. They were the middle class of the Reich. This was compartmentalization as a tool of statecraft. The system functioned through rigid fragmentation. 6 specialized departments divided the labor of death. The political department handled the Gestapo's local files. The administration department managed the loot. The medical and labor departments calculated the speed of exhaustion. No single official had to confront the totality of the crime. They only had to process their specific paperwork. Domestic life flourished within earshot of the chimneys. Officers lived in comfortable villas with their wives and children. They tended gardens. They hosted dinner parties. Social clubs provided a space for recreation and music. The screams of the selection ramp were merely background noise to a Sunday brunch. The diary of SS physician Johann Paul Kramer captures this clinical duality. On September 2, 1942, he attended his first special action. He described the experience as the horror of horrors. Later that same evening, he wrote about the excellent meal he enjoyed at the officers' mess. Kramer recorded the weight of living organs harvested from prisoners alongside the quality of the wine served at his club. He remained a functional officer until the end. The archives preserve the handwritten entries of Dr. Johann Kramer. The SS did not maintain order through force alone. They built a hierarchy. While Dr. Johann Kramer recorded his dinners, a predatory vertical took shape inside the electrified fences. The administration integrated the victims into the machinery of their own destruction. Prisoners became capos. They received a visual mark of authority, a clean-colored armband over filthy striped rags. This fabric strip granted the power of life and death. The state outsourced its violence to the oppressed. The spectrum of betrayal was vast. Emil Bednarek, a Polish prisoner, transformed into a prolific executioner. He personally murdered over 100 inmates to secure his standing with the guards. In the same barracks, Jewish boxer Salamo Aruch used his status to shield fellow Greeks in the Monowitz subcamp. Survival required a choice between the role of protector or the role of predator. Beyond the prisoner guards stood the elite architects of the system. The SS Medical Corps weaponized biology. They replaced the Hippocratic Oath with racial hygiene. Doctors did not heal. They categorized the unfit and managed the logistics of the gas chambers. In May 1943, a new figure arrived to refine the process of human selection: Joseph Mengele. The arrival of Joseph Mengele signaled a shift toward biological radicalism. But the camp's stability relied on a much older tactic: divide and rule. The SS High Command integrated marginalized groups into the power vertical to maintain absolute control. This ethnic stratification was a calculated geopolitical move. By recruiting auxiliaries from occupied territories, specifically Ukrainians and Balts, the Nazi state reduced the strain on German manpower reserves. These recruits occupied a lower rung than German officers. They often compensated for their inferior status through extreme brutality. To the SS, these men were expendable tools for domesticating the masses of prisoners. Women also held positions in this hierarchy. Approximately 200 female guards oversaw the women's sections. Maria Mandel and Irma Gries became symbols of this administrative cruelty. Gries was only 20 years old. Prisoners called her the blonde angel of Auschwitz. She personally selected victims for the gas chambers. She frequently beat women to death with a whip. Below the guards stood the capos. These were privileged prisoners tasked with supervising their peers in exchange for better rations and separate housing. The SS initially filled these roles with German career criminals, identified by green triangles. Refusing the position meant death. Accepting it meant becoming a cog in the machine of oppression. This created a fractured society where victims policed victims. The administration systematically turned different categories of prisoners against each other to prevent any unified resistance. While the guards maintained the rigid social hierarchy, the camp administration engineered a macroeconomy of calibrated starvation. It was a biological equation: 700 to 1,000 calories. This was the daily intake. A body performing heavy labor requires 4,000. Why did the state choose to starve its own workforce? It was an essential pillar of the extermination plan. This was not a failure of logistics, but a triumph of engineering. A prisoner received 300 grams of black bread for dinner. Sometimes, a thin layer of synthetic margarine or a spoonful of beet jam accompanied it. The math was simple. The daily deficit of 3,000 calories ensured the total disintegration of muscle tissue within a fixed time frame. The physical environment mirrored this nutritional collapse. Blueprints reveal the transition from animal husbandry to human storage. An engineer took the original plans for a stable designed for 40 horses. He crossed out the stalls. He replaced them with triple-tiered wooden bunks, one bunk for 5 people, one stable for 1,000 prisoners. The air grew heavy. The stench of open trench latrines filled the lungs. Hygiene was a luxury of the past. Collective showers occurred perhaps once a month. Between the evening roll call and the curfew, less than 2 hours remained. This was the only free time. In the dark, prisoners fought for space at the latrines or searched for news of vanished relatives. Biological wear and tear became a predictable metric. The SS viewed the human body as a machine with a known expiration date. They didn't just build a camp, they built a furnace fueled by metabolism. The final capacity of a single horse stable was 1,000 people. Labor served as a biological weapon. A calculated deficit of 2,000 to 3,000 calories transformed physical exertion into a mechanism of rapid exhaustion. Capos formed the work detachments. Internal commands marched toward the perimeter. External commands crossed it. Survival depended on the destination. Factories and workshops offered a chance. The quarries and drainage swamps offered none. A prisoner lifts a jagged stone. He carries it 50 meters. He drops it. He picks it up again. He carries it back to the starting point. The SS did not prioritize production. They prioritized friction. Work was the tool used to grind human tissue into dust. At noon, the process paused for a single liter of watery liquid. Prisoners stared into wooden bowls, a translucent broth of turnips and beetroots. No fat, no protein. Occasionally, a microscopic fragment of potato or a stray shred of meat appeared in the gray water. This meal provided 300 calories. It was not fuel. It was a stay of execution for a few more hours. The SS administration treated human bodies as industrial equipment. They calculated the rate of depreciation. They factored in the cost of disposal. In August 1942, a secret SS report formalized this logic. It stated that strenuous labor combined with starvation rations guaranteed death within 90 days. Systematic wear was more cost-effective than a bullet. Physical collapse was the planned economic outcome of the August 1942 report. The process of biological wear and tear followed a strict protocol. Reports from 1942 documented every hour of the prisoner's existence. The administration codified the destruction of the body into an official 11-hour workday. Often, it lasted longer. Guards and capos extended the shifts on a whim. Performance was the only currency. Insufficient output resulted in immediate, brutal beatings. When a prisoner collapsed, the system discarded them. They faced a choice between execution on the spot or a transfer to the camp hospital. In reality, the infirmary served only as an antechamber for the gas chambers. The bureaucracy demanded a total headcount at the evening roll call. Exhausted men dragged the heavy, stiffening corpses of their comrades back to the square. The dead had to attend the lineup. SS officials required a perfect numerical match to prove no one had escaped during the shift. Living and dead became a single inventory of the state. Work ended, but the starvation continued. The administration issued the final ration of the day to those still standing. It was a block of hard, dark substance, 300 grams of black bread. The daily ration of 300 grams of black bread met its structural counterpart in the appel. This was the roll call. On paper, it served as a bureaucratic census. In practice, it functioned as a mechanism for total physiological suppression. The procedure demanded absolute immobility. Prisoners stood in rigid rows for 1 to 2 hours, regardless of the weather. A single involuntary twitch triggered immediate execution. The SS did not count people, they counted units of labor. If the numbers failed to align due to overnight deaths, the process stretched into infinity. The system reached its breaking point in December 1942. A discrepancy in the records forced a roll call that lasted 19 consecutive hours. A blizzard tore through the ranks. By the time the count ended, hundreds of prisoners had died of hypothermia while standing at attention. The conclusion of the count brought the morning ration. It was a warm, black liquid. The inmates called it coffee, though it possessed zero nutritional value. Each prisoner carried a makeshift container. To lose the vessel was to forfeit all future rations. Capos began organizing the work commandos. Thousands of exhausted bodies moved toward the gates to begin the secondary phase of exhaustion. The guards poured the bitter, dark liquid into rusted tins. The daily ration of surrogate coffee and 30-minute standing sessions in the snow led to an inevitable epidemiological collapse. The administration ignored quarantine protocols. They refused to stop incoming transports, even during the peak of infection. Logistic density dictated the mortality rate. The wooden bunks were engineered for 5 people. The SS crammed 8 prisoners into each slot. No mattresses, no blankets. In winter, the temperature inside the barracks dropped below 0. In summer, the lack of ventilation turned the structures into kilns. Typhus, dysentery, and tuberculosis spread through the physical contact of 8 bodies in one berth. Lice and fleas infested the wood. By 1943, the typhus epidemic reached its industrial peak. How many died every 24 hours? Medical records show a loss of 750 prisoners daily. Every morning, the blocks reported the night's fatalities. The staff dragged the bodies outside. They piled the corpses near the entrances in distorted positions caused by rigor mortis. The survivors reached a state of total psychological indifference. In the first week, a corpse was a tragedy. After a month, a body was merely an obstacle in the mud. The orderlies stacked the dead like cordwood without looking at their faces. The logistics of death shifted toward an industrial bypass for those unable to maintain the camp's production rhythm. This separate line targeted arrivals deemed biologically or physically non-viable. Selection began on the ramp. SS doctors assessed thousands in seconds. 70 to 80% of every transport went directly to the gas chambers. The administration viewed this as a necessity for maintaining the facility's throughput. The mechanism relied on deception. Panic was the primary enemy of efficiency. To prevent delays, the SS engineered an illusion of hygiene. Victims saw signs for disinfection. They entered rooms with numbered hooks for their clothing. Orchestras of prisoners played light music near the entrance. Guards handed out soap and towels. Above, fake shower heads hung from the concrete ceiling. Then the reality shifted. The heavy doors sealed hermetically. Clamps locked from the outside. The music faded behind thick walls. SS guards wearing protective masks climbed onto the roof. They opened small hatches. Inside, they dropped pellets of Zyklon B. The chemical reacted with the air. It released hydrogen cyanide. Toxic crystals evaporated into a lethal cloud. Death by asphyxiation followed. It lasted up to 20 minutes. The gas concentration was highest near the floor, making children the first to succumb. The SS documented the procedure as a technical success. High-purity Zyklon B crystals ensured the conveyor remained operational. The operational cycle of the gas chambers required a specific category of labor. Who maintained this machinery of death from the inside? The SS administration assigned this task to the Sonderkommando, special units formed from the prisoners themselves. These men monitored the intake. They watched as victims entered a changing room. The guards promised a shower. The victims stripped. Every door was then hermetically sealed from the outside. SS technicians poured Zyklon B crystals through ceiling apertures. Death by asphyxiation followed within minutes. The camp functioned as a hybrid of a slaughterhouse and a corporate subsidiary. In 1942, the complex expanded with the construction of Auschwitz III Monowitz. This was not a mere prison, but a massive industrial site for synthetic rubber and liquid fuels. The German chemical monopoly, IG Farben, integrated its interests directly into the SS death apparatus. IG Farben invested 700 million marks into the Monowitz slave labor project. The logistical infrastructure funded by industrial monopolies reached its absolute operational peak in the spring of 1944. The complex ceased to be a camp. It became a high-speed refinery. 12,000. On May 13, 1944, 12,000 Hungarian Jews arrived at the ramp in a single 24-hour cycle. The SS bureaucracy processed the entire transport with mechanical precision. From this mass, officers selected only 100 people for labor. The remaining 11,900 vanished into the gas chambers before sunset. The intake process followed a rigid sequence of dehumanization. For the 100 survivors, The procedure began in the registration rooms. First, guards confiscated every remaining personal item. Then, the barbers took over. Steel clippers moved rapidly over scalps. A thick layer of dark and gray hair covered the concrete floor. SS personnel swept the remains into piles. They stuffed the hair into burlap sacks for transport to the Reich's textile factories. The administration treated human remains as a strategic raw material. In the camp warehouses, the military authorities stored 7,000 kilograms of human hair ready for industrial shipment. By May 1943, the continuous influx of human material had transformed Auschwitz into the largest research testing ground for German academic science. The SS medical service ceased to view prisoners as subjects. They became raw data. Joseph Mengele arrived at the camp that spring to realize a specific geopolitical goal: the biological foundation for a permanent racial hierarchy. He saw an unlimited human laboratory. Mengele focused his obsession on 1,500 pairs of twins. The process was clinical. One twin served as the control, the other as the variable. Doctors injected toxic substances into living tissue. They performed cross-blood transfusions. They poured corrosive chemicals into pupils to change eye color. How did the system handle the final stage of comparison? It mandated simultaneous execution. If one twin died of disease, the other was murdered immediately, with a phenol injection to the heart. This allowed for perfectly synchronized autopsies and the direct comparison of internal organs. In Block 10 of Auschwitz I, the academic elite practiced mass sterilization. Karl Klauberg, a renowned pre-war gynecologist, led the project. The goal was industrial-scale infertility without surgery. The procedure in Block 10 followed a strict protocol. A doctor injected caustic chemicals into the uterus. No anesthesia was permitted. The chemical caused immediate massive inflammation. The stench of corrosive acids filled the clinical space, clashing with the filth of the surrounding barracks. Schumann pursued a different path. Dr. Horst Schumann used high-dose X-rays. He targeted the genitals of prisoners to find the cheapest method for sterilizing millions of future Slavic laborers. The radiation caused severe burns and necrosis. Weeks later, surgeons extirpated the reproductive organs while the victims remained conscious. Schumann noted in his official reports that subjects experienced extreme pain. He categorized this agony as a tolerable margin of error. It did not affect the validity of the results. The doctors maintained meticulous journals and structured their findings into formal dissertations. These papers were not screams of madness. They were peer-reviewed contributions to the state's demographic project. Physicians regularly presented their findings and wrote articles for specialized medical journals. The data collected by Joseph Mengele did not remain in the classified archives of the SS. It flowed directly into the civilian heart of the Third Reich. This was not rogue pseudoscience. It was a state-sponsored academic enterprise. German academic institutions provided the structural backbone for these atrocities. The Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Anthropology regularly received human organ shipments from the death camps. Grants were approved. Peer-reviewed articles were published. Universities processed human remains as biological specimens. How did the system legitimize mass murder? Through grants, peer-reviewed articles, and rigorous academic bureaucracy. Bureaucracy divided the labor of death into sterile administrative steps. One clerk signed the funding request. Another stamped the transport manifest. A third filed the laboratory report. The rustle of official documents with university seals replaced the screams of the subjects. High-ranking academics in Berlin viewed these reports as legitimate contributions to racial science. They ignored the origin. They focused on the data. This institutional complicity ensured that the Holocaust was a subsidized project. Prestigious researchers built their careers on materials sourced from the gas chambers. Decades later, these same academic structures would continue to operate. Many institutions rebranded, quietly burying the origins of their foundational medical data after 1945. Within this factory of death, some victims were forced to become tools of the machine. Miklos Niisli, a Hungarian Jewish pathologist, performed autopsies under Mengele's direct supervision. He moved between the dissecting table and the furnace. He saw the systematic destruction of millions from the inside. While the German academic elite analyzed his findings in comfortable offices, Niisli worked in the shadow of the chimneys. Dr. Niisli maintained a secret record of every crime he was forced to assist. The state machine demanded a total ideological sterilization of its operators. It had to erase the border between clinical medicine and industrial homicide. Johann Kramer maintained a precise record of this transition. On September 5, 1942, the SS physician noted his participation in a special action. In the official lexicon of the Reich, Sonderbehandlung, or special treatment, was the legal euphemism for systematic selection and gassing. Kramer wrote that Dante's Inferno seemed like a comedy compared to the reality of the bunker. Then, the entry shifted. In the same paragraph, he praised the afternoon meal: fresh tomatoes, white bread, and genuine butter. This psychological split was not accidental. The state reframed genocide as a routine sanitary task. Officers learned that Jews, Roma, and Slavs were not humans, but biological threats to the purity of the Aryan race. How did the system neutralize the guilt of its executioners? It weaponized the language of hygiene. Mass murder became a sanitary service. Shooting and gassing were rebranded as disinfection. To kill was to protect the racial health of Europe. This linguistic adaptation allowed the bureaucracy to bypass individual moral resistance. Every order for extermination passed through 4 distinct administrative levels before reaching the gas chambers. Medical rationalization reached its practical execution on the Auschwitz unloading ramp. Here, the Third Reich initiated the bureaucratic erasure of the individual. The process followed a strict industrial sequence. Trains stopped. Doors slid open. SS officers issued commands with mechanical precision. Thousands of deportees stepped into a simulated environment of order. Why was such a meticulous simulation of normalcy required? To prevent panic and maximize the conveyor belt's throughput. The victims participated in their own dehumanization. They formed straight lines. They surrendered luggage. They stripped according to specific instructions. Every movement served the logistics of processing massive numbers. To manage this human flow, the Nazi state deployed advanced technology. The SS utilized IBM Hollerith punch card machines to track the logistics of death. Clerks sat at desks. The mechanical clacking of typewriters filled the processing rooms. They transformed names into alphanumeric codes. Survival within the wires depended on unwritten rules. Veteran prisoners whispered the tactics. Never stand out. Avoid guards known for sadism. Secure indoor labor. Tiny networks of solidarity formed along linguistic lines, but hunger usually choked these gestures. The administration prioritized data over lives. Every transport received a unique designation. Every group underwent meticulous counting. Officers compiled detailed selection reports for the central archives. Bureaucrats filed these transport reports into standardized gray folders. Registered inmates immediately integrated into a rigid hierarchy under the management of the SS and Capo overseers. The Reich Main Security Office issued the directives. Auschwitz transformed these orders into a vertical pyramid of terror. It was a self-regulating mechanism of oppression. How did a few hundred guards control tens of thousands? The system delegated daily violence downward. At the summit, SS officers monitored the perimeter. In the middle, the capos, prisoners appointed as foremen, executed the labor. The capo held the power of life and death over their own kind. They received extra rations and a wooden room for their service. One blow from a capo's stick maintained order more effectively than an SS machine gun. This delegation allowed the Schutzstaffel to maintain a minimal ratio of guards to prisoners. It saved state resources. It automated the cruelty. The pyramid crushed the mass of prisoners at the base. Fear flowed from the top, but the hands that struck the prisoners often wore the same striped uniform. The architecture of management eliminated the need for constant external force. The system achieved maximum optimization. The transition to prison hierarchy began where human empathy ended. SS authorities forced inmates to manage the very machinery of their own oppression. The first corpse triggered a physical shock. The second caused nausea. After 3 weeks, the dead were merely objects to be moved. Veterans stepped over bodies without breaking stride. Their eyes remained hollow and dry. Survival required this internal desert. Inside the perimeter, prisoners balanced on a wire between solidarity and betrayal. Small networks of mutual aid emerged in the shadows. They traded bread for information. They bartered thin blankets for protection. But extreme scarcity turned allies into rivals. A single crust of sawdust bread decided who lived until dawn. The capo system institutionalized this desperation. The SS selected supervisors from the prisoner population. These men received extra rations and private bunks. In exchange, they maintained brutal discipline. Some capos exceeded the cruelty of their masters to prove their loyalty. Others used their position to divert the weakest from the work details. Resource management dictated every movement in the camp. The administration conducted constant inspections to maintain the quota of productive labor. The doctors performed rapid selections to purge the exhausted. An SS officer pointed a finger at the men with sunken chests. Raoul Hilberg reached a cold conclusion. The Holocaust was not the work of madmen. It was the crowning achievement of efficient state bureaucracy. Routine administrative tasks replaced morality. The integration of victims into this machinery reached its absolute limit with the Sonderkommandos. These special squads performed the industrial labor of death. The SS selected men from the new Jewish arrivals. Stronger, younger, useful. Why did the system use them? The bureaucracy demanded distance between the executioner and the victim. The mechanism operated like a factory floor. The Sonderkommandos led the crowds into the undressing rooms. They reassured the panicked. They collected the discarded clothing. After the gas stopped, they entered the chambers. They dragged out the bodies. They extracted gold teeth. They cut off hair. Finally, they shoved the remains into the crematoria. The administration ensured total secrecy. The SS liquidated the entire Sonderkommando every few months. New arrivals replaced the old. This cycle guaranteed that no living witness to the industrial slaughter survived the process. These men occupied a space beyond ordinary horror. They existed as victims, executioners, and witnesses at the same time. This group stood on the final border between duty and damnation. The system encountered an invisible spiritual resistance, even under the pressure of constant selections. The bureaucratic machine demanded physical utility. Anything else was waste. Medical inspections followed a rigid schedule. SS doctors evaluated thousands of bodies in minutes. The criteria were binary: work or the gas chamber. Prisoners developed a survival methodology to deceive the inspectors. They pinched their cheeks to simulate blood flow. They stood upright with superhuman effort to hide skeletal frailty. To look sick was a death sentence. To look healthy was a temporary reprieve. Beyond the physical facade, the administrative control fractured. Intellectual and spiritual life continued in the shadows of the overcrowded barracks. This was not merely comfort. It was a calculated sabotage of dehumanization. Jews prayed in absolute silence. Catholics shared improvised hosts made of bread scraps. Protestants recited biblical passages from memory. In the darkness, the camp became a clandestine university. Prisoner doctors delivered whispered scientific lectures to those lying on wooden bunks. Professors taught mathematics and foreign languages without paper or ink. Poets composed verses, transmitting them orally from one row to another. The state intended to erase the individual. The individual responded by preserving the mind. The system maintained its pace through the mechanical repetition of these medical exams. SS doctors conducted these formal selections exactly twice every week. By late 1944, the machine began to fracture from within. Resistance moved from spiritual survival to physical sabotage. In the shadows of the industrial complex, prisoners planned a strike against the heart of the mechanism. How does a state death machine react to military collapse? It attempts to physically erase its own existence. The inmates struck first. Members of the Sonderkommando smuggled explosives from a nearby munitions factory. A deafening roar shattered the camp's enforced silence. Crematorium 4 disintegrated in a cloud of brick and steel. The blast destroyed the strict acoustic discipline of the facility. Rebels killed several SS guards in the chaos. The response was immediate and clinical. SS units surrounded the survivors. They lined the rebels against the walls. The administration executed every single participant on the spot. By the end of 1944, the Red Army was crossing the Polish border. The bureaucratic focus shifted from production to liquidation of evidence. Orders came from Berlin: dismantle Auschwitz. SS officers threw mountains of administrative archives into the fires. Dynamite teams wired the remaining crematoria. The structures that processed hundreds of thousands vanished in controlled explosions. The state was burning its receipts. On January 17, 1945, the final evacuation began. The SS forced the remaining population out of the barracks and onto the frozen roads. 60,000 people. They marched into the sub-zero Polish winter. This was not a relocation of labor. The death marches served a logistical purpose. Use the extreme cold to eliminate witnesses without wasting a single bullet. Anyone who stumbled was shot. Thousands died of exhaustion in the snow. The SS administration completed the execution of the rebel prisoners. Soviet units entered the camp on January 27, 1945. They did not find the functioning fortress. They found the wreckage of an industrial slaughterhouse and abandoned evidence. The SS had fled. Left behind were 7,000 survivors. Most were too weak to stand. The scale of the project required a final audit. Between 1940 and 1945, the machinery processed 1,300,000 deportees. 1,100,000 people never left. 960,000 of them were Jews. The death toll in this single complex exceeded the combined military losses of the United States and Great Britain for the entire Second World War. Warehouses overflowed with sorted cargo, mountains of spectacles, pyramids of worn shoes, tons of human hair. This was the inventory of a state-run enterprise. The director of the facility remained alive. British troops captured Rudolf Höss in 1946. In 1947, he stood before a Polish tribunal. Höss did not scream. He did not deny. He provided a dry, pedantic testimony on the efficiency of the gas chambers. He corrected the prosecution on technical details. He viewed the genocide as a successfully completed logistical task. Justice returned to the site of the crime. Authorities erected a gallows next to the crematorium at Auschwitz. Rudolf Höss was hanged on the territory of his own camp. The execution of Commandant Höss in 1947 remained a historical anomaly. For every official on the gallows, hundreds of architects of the Holocaust walked free. Post-war justice functioned with selective blindness. Millions of victims faced an industrial machine. Only a handful of its operators faced a courtroom. The rat lines operated with precision. Middle-ranking officials and high-tier killers utilized a clandestine network of forged documents and neutral ports. Bureaucrats in Europe and South America coordinated the exodus. Joseph Mengele vanished into this systemic void. The Angel of Death traded his laboratory for a quiet life in Brazil. He died in 1979. He suffered a stroke while swimming. No handcuffs, no trial, no reckoning. Auschwitz-Birkenau now functions as a state museum. The infrastructure of genocide is a public exhibit. Visitors walk the length of the death ramp. They see the rusted rails and the collapsed shells of the crematoria. These are not just ruins. They are the physical evidence of a modern state that integrated murder into its daily ledger. The site serves as a warning against the fusion of extreme ideology and cold bureaucracy. The barracks are decaying. The concrete is crumbling. The site remains a silent witness to a project that processed over 1 million humans into ash.